Ted opens the door just a crack. He looks out, and the police officer says, "Hi, Ted. I'm sorry, I get here so early in the morning, but I got these gentlemen from a mining company that are going to survey the property, and we need to find your property markers on posts at the corners of your property." And Ted says, "Well, they're out there. They can just go look." Police officer said, "No, they're covered with snow. We need you to come out and help." By this time, Ted had opened his door and he had stepped out on the front little porch there. He said, "Well, let me get my coat." And so he turns around to go back in, and they grab him.
For 17 years, the FBI chased the Unabomber. This is the man who finally caught him.
I think this case is one of the most famous cases ever in the United States. The FBI spent some 17 years analyzing Kaczynski and the Unabomber about what he built. But what I found interesting, Jim, is that the way he got caught is by what he said. And there seems to be a lot of controversy about the manifesto. Okay, I want to ask you about the manifesto because it looks like you were one of the key proponents of releasing and publishing the manifesto, but there was pushback from some of the powers that be at DOJ and FBI, and certainly the two publications that he had requested. I would love to know the story behind that. That was a risky, heroic move on your part that could have failed. Did you ever consider what might have happened if that had backfired on you?
Oh, many times. It definitely is what would keep you awake at night.
Sure.
But you talk about his words is what let him down. And that's what got me into the case, because I had, by coincidence, just to go back a little bit, the Unabomber began in 1978, at the same time I went to Miami, and I just in a Miami office, and I was following his activities from afar and hoping I would never, ever have to have the case in my division.
Sure.
And some years later, then in 1993, is when I came to San Francisco, and he had just done 2 bombings and kind of awakening of the Unabomber after 6-year laying low after an eyewitness had spotted him up in Utah. And it was a concern to me that a lot of my agents were having to work on the case, but yet we had a task force here that was being directed out of Washington. And I was okay that for a while because we had activities going. I came in, took over the San Francisco office, and we had the polyclass kidnapping at that time, and also was busy. And when that resolved itself, and the next year, 1994, I paid more attention to the case because my agents were working. We had 3 historical bombings here before 1993, 2 of which were at the University of California in Berkeley, which was odd. And so it was about that time that I decided my men are working on the case. My men and women are working on the case more and more. These temporary agents that are here in the task force are trying to go home because they got their families and things. And so I decided to work the case, direct the case, if Director Louis Freeh would hear of that. And so one day I called him accidentally. I guess it was on April Fool's Day. I didn't know that, but at the time I didn't pay attention. But I volunteered for a case, like you said. There was kind of a loser case because for 17 years, well, at that time, 15 years, there were a lot of
much happened. Yep.
Yeah. And so, but it was his words that caused me to say, I think we can catch this guy, because he wrote a letter to the New York Times, an editor of the New York Times, at the exact same time that he had mailed 2 bombs from Sacramento, and one blew up in my hometown now of Tiburon at a doctor geneticist's home, and he survived that, but it was really a bad medical situation for him. And a couple of days later, the second bomb went off at the at Yale University in Connecticut. And it was the Unabomber announcing himself back to the world. I'm back after 6 years, and he had better bombs. And suddenly he broke his silence. He had been silent for all those years, and all of a sudden he's writing a letter to the largest newspaper. And he's throwing out saying that he's with an anarchist group, FC, and ask the FBI. They know about FC. So he's like, it just goes from total silence to now he's yappering about everything and bringing the FBI up. And I think, I've known people, criminals, bombers, etc., that talk to the media, get a message out, and they're in prison today because they make a mistake. And so I thought, I'm thinking he's making a mistake that's going to he'll pay for down the line. And
what if the manifesto had been published? Because apparently you had to struggle to get the New York Times and the Post to publish it. They didn't want to do it. They said, we don't want anything to do with this. This would be look like aiding the police. How did you convince them finally to publish his manifesto?
Well, actually, we had to convince our own agents of that first because he had built a case here that was basically, I'm going to kill people. It's publish or perish. Either republish my manifesto or I'm going to blow up a plane that's leaving Los Angeles International Airport within the next 6 days. And he had already, years before, tried to blow up a plane. He put a bomb in a mail package aboard an American Airlines flight from Chicago to Washington, D.C. He had rigged up a altimeter from a barometer that it would blow up at a certain altitude. That worked. Yeah. But the bomb fizzled and created a fire in a hole. An emergency landing is what saved the passengers and crew. But you had to take a guy seriously that's already attempted mass murder. Now he's threatening.
Yeah.
That's extortion. And policy of the U.S. government was you don't yield to terrorist demands, or else you'll get nothing but terrorist demands after that. So nobody wanted to do it.
Right.
And we had a long meeting among the task force agents, and I just let them talk, and nobody wanted to do it. And that recommendation was to go back to Director Freeh that we have other means to solve this case. This is not the way to go. But then the agents, after they told me that, and before we called the Freeh, they had a change of heart. And Terry Turchi was my agent that was managing day-to-day operations of the task force and all. He came to me in my office and he says, Jim, we want to change our mind here. We think that somebody will actually recognize the words that are in this manifesto.
Wow.
Because every one of us that had read it, we had also at this time, of course, his brother, when he was able to read the manifesto, he recognized the words too. So we were true and correct on the right track in saying somebody, whether it's a professor, college professor, a roommate, family member. We didn't know a family member, but thank goodness.
Let me ask, did the brother see the manifesto before it was published?
No, he did not.
So he actually saw it because it was published.
Because, in fact, his wife had read it. She talked to him and said, "You better read this manifesto. That sounds like your brother." And she'd never met Ted.
Right.
But she had read his letters that he sent back to his brother, and he used a lot of the same words in those letters back to David. And David picked out a few phrases in another document that had been that he had published 20 years earlier, and all. It was sounding a lot like the words in the manifesto. Yeah. So David was on board finally. That I think he's, or I'm afraid that he's the Unabomber.
How did David feel about basically turning in his own brother? How was that? How did that go down?
Well, it was he didn't think very much of it, but he was so much concerned, knowing that people would die. They had this threat, that either publish it or I'm going to blow up an airplane. And we had every right to believe that actually would happen.
Right.
So I heard about person David by means of his attorney in Washington, D.C., who called me and said, I have a client thinks his brother might be the Unabomber. And so we exchanged some information about that. And he said, I can't tell you, my client won't let me divulge his name.
Right.
But what he wants is one thing. He wants you to take the death penalty off the table. So,
wow.
Anyone knows in law enforcement.
That's quite a request. Yeah.
Yeah. First time I I didn't even know the subject's name, and I'm already being asked to take the death penalty off. And of course, I don't have the
jurisdiction. Yeah. One other question I heard, and you can either confirm or deny this, that actually CBS News got a hold of Ted's name before you guys were ready to move and were threatening to run a story before you were ready to go. Is that true or false?
Oh, that's absolutely true.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I had, producer, actually, a producer from 60 Minutes had made a call into me and said he wanted to meet right away. And I'm in Montana at the time, but I didn't want to tell him I'm in Montana because he didn't know he just knew that we were focusing on a suspect out west. And his source was, I still don't know who his source was, but it was somebody that only had a portion of the information. And he seemed to be getting it a little bit more every few hours. And the guy would call back and say, we think he's this, we think he's in the mountains of Montana. And this, he just starts getting closer and closer. And Terry Turchi was listening to this, and he had a computerization project that was underway. It was a huge thing because this was in 1995, 96 by this time. Computers in the FBI had just arrived.
Right.
The data was all corrupted because it was every type of memo, teletype, report, laboratory report, and all. Nothing was standardized that could go into a computer. So it was really slow to get the data in there. But we're also throwing in data from the universities that had been targeted, the students that were there at that time, faculty, everything. And as soon as, while we're working behind the scenes, I'm talking to this lawyer, and he's talking to Dave Kaczynski and said, I'll call you back to see if you'll agree to the terms. He was still hung up on this, take the death penalty off the table. And I said, well, I can't do that, but here's what I'll do. I'll send you a letter saying I will make a recommendation to the prosecutor that this is what the brother wants.
Sure.
I can go that far. And I faxed him that letter, and that's what they're discussing about whether the brother David Kaczynski would agree to divulge his brother's name. And so in that interim, Terry Turchi fed this information into our computer, and out popped the same name that the attorney was giving me, Ted Kaczynski, because he had said had been a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. He grew up in Chicago, and really just on those 2 points, we already had, those were data points that were in our haystack of information from all the investigations and other information we'd gathered. And so we actually had, when he got on the phone and said, okay, we can give you the name. And I said, is it Theodore Kaczynski? And it was.
They had it. Yeah. What stopped them from running the story? I mean, they were going to run it, but apparently you made the arrest, and later that day they did their story.
Well, there was a lot of negotiation, which often happens with, cases and where you have imminent danger and all that. The media will see the benefit of giving law enforcement a little extra time, and thank God they did, because
yes,
we had an affidavit for a search warrant and or an arrest warrant. And I'm talking to Louis Freeh, the director, and he's a former prosecutor himself and all. And he says, Jim, you have adequate probable cause there for an arrest warrant or a search warrant. But then as the day progressed, Department of Justice would not put their careers on the line and say, here's an arrest warrant. So they gave me a search warrant.
Right.
And the search warrant, how do you have a bomber, a known murderer, in a cabin, isolated cabin, and serving a search warrant? Are you just supposed to go up and knock on the door and say, excuse me, Mr. Kaczynski, we're here to serve a warrant?
Like to have a chat.
I want to jump in here because I think this is a really good point to share with the audience. And a lot of people may not be aware of this, but the FBI, when you're doing an investigation, and most investigations oftentimes are these long-term investigations, unlike local law enforcement can go out based on probable cause, and they can lock somebody up, and then the state attorneys, district attorneys review the case later on. You are a bit hamstrung by that because, as you had just said, you could get a search warrant, but these prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office wouldn't give you an arrest warrant, but you had already said even you and the FBI director both agreed that you had probable cause. Maybe delve into that a little bit more. I mean, I worked on a number of multi-agency task forces with the feds, and the local, state and local, we could go and initiate an arrest, and oftentimes the feds would tell us, you guys go grab that guy because you can hook him up on probable cause. We have to jump through these bureaucratic hoops to go through the DOJ and the U.S. Attorney's Office to make this happen. Just maybe talk a little bit about that and how that was a hindrance or even if it wasn't.
Well, it definitely was a hindrance. Bureaucracy was a hindrance from the day one on this case. In the FBI and our headquarters and supervisory staff, everything operated kind of on work individual cases, a whole variety. But you get into a mindset on these various types of crimes that one size fits all. You have the statute, you have this facts, and you put it together, and it kind of all works out the same way. But that wasn't the case for the Unabomber. That had been tried for 15 years at this point. And I had a deal with the director when I volunteered to take on the case, was to have absolute direction of the case nationwide, instead of having 56 SACs, special agents in charge in the field working it from their standpoint, and the Sacramento Police Department working their murder case, and the New Jersey Police Department working their murder case. We're going to bring it all together, and it's going to be singular. And nobody's going to talk to me talking about the leak and all. Nobody's going to talk to the media except me. I became the media point for the 2 years that I had the case. And we had to deal where we're actually bypassing bureaucracy at headquarters. And we're talking directly to the director. We're talking directly to Attorney General Janet Reno. And it was with them that Terry Turchi and I went with them to meet with the publishers and convince the publishers that there was a law enforcement purpose that would make it worthwhile to set aside the requirement that you don't yield to a terroristic threat. We think by publishing the manifesto, it will serve the purpose. People will recognize, because it's such unique subject matter, somebody will recognize it. So we put our reputations on the line on that one.
How hard was that conversation? I mean, did those publishers push back pretty hard, or were you able to win them over easily?
That was a very interesting meeting. I'll say this. So you had the publishers, from the New York Times and Washington Post.
Right.
And their editorial staff they brought with them in a conference room at FBI headquarters. And Janet Reno walked across the street to be there. And it was very interesting. And they first were not interested in being a tool of the law enforcement and the federal government. You can't, you're not going to be telling us what to do. We're going to make our own decision, but please give us the facts that would cause you to want, to want to do this. And so we went through that whole presentation, and they came up with, well, okay, if we just, hypotheticals, if we decide to do this, what if he then continues bombing?
Yes.
And our psychologists and all that we had on the case would say he will continue bombing. You can't trust him. Even if you do what he says in public, he might still bomb.
Right.
And so that is a risk, and it's a risk to the publishers, but it's a risk to Janet Reno, to the director of FBI, Louis Freeh. So the publisher turned to the Attorney General and to Louis Freeh and said, what if we publish and he bombs, what then? And to her credit, Janet Reno sat up straight and said, you can say that the Attorney General of the United States authorized this course of action, and it's for, it's to help out law enforcement. And
wow.
Louis Freeh jumped right in behind that and said, then you can say the director of the FBI approves of it because it serves a law enforcement purpose. And that was
wow. Janet stood up and Louis backed up right behind her.
And
Wish I had it on camera.
did they agree right then and there, or did they waver and kind of to me it's insane that the news media wouldn't want to cooperate. I mean, what's their liability at that point? It'd be interesting to was there really some battle going on behind the scenes, just people losing their cool and saying, what in the hell are you even thinking here? There's people's lives at stake, and conversations to that effect.
That was all going. All of that was going on, but not in this close knit group that actually making the decisions. And those decisions were made in that room that day. And they, the publishers, they said, "Well, give us a moment," and they talked among themselves. Well, this is a 35,000 page manifesto or document. It's a small book. We publish newspapers. We don't publish books. So how are we going to do this? So there was talking about, well, maybe we should, and we thought this might be a good idea too, just kind of serialize it over a period of days instead of just publishing the entire thing. And they kind of liked that idea. And they actually worked out, well, Washington Post can pay for this and we'll pay for that. That all happened right there around the conference table. And when they left, everybody was on the same page.
So, Jim, the publishing of the manifesto seems to be the key moment in this case that helped to solve it. There's so many other details, and we can go back and talk about the beginning of the case and how everything transpired. But since we're at this point already, okay, the manifesto gets published. You've talked about the brother recognizes that those are the words of his brother, Ted Kaczynski. And now you've got your suspect. You even came up with the same name through other means. So take us now through that part of the process. The case is now broken. How do you arrest Ted Kaczynski? He lives in the mountains in Montana. How do you even find him, number one? And then how did the arrest actually go down?
Okay, well, I'll correct one thing. The case had not broken in the sense that the public didn't know yet. So this was very much a tightly held secret.
Broke with you. Yeah.
Even within, it was a need to know basis. So even agents on the periphery of the Unabomber investigation were not told that we're locked in on a suspect. We're sending a group of people and a supervisor, Max Knoll, to Montana to start investigating this suspect. We didn't tell our own office in Salt Lake City that actually had administrative responsibility for Montana. We set up and I went there, Terry Turchi went there. We set up a little mini field office in Helena, Montana. We rented office space. We were there for 40 days, actually. Kind of biblical in a sense, but it was 40 days from the first time that we landed in Helena, Montana, until we made the arrest. And in those 40 days, we had to come up with convincing evidence because Max Knoll, the supervisor there, had gone out we've made a contact of the neighbor that ran a sawmill next to Ted's cabin. He knew him personally. And he told this is the same day that Max introduced himself to this owner of the property. And the guy offered, well, let's just walk up the trail here and I'll just show you what you're dealing with in terms of the cabin and all. So Ted it was March at this time, and snow was still everywhere, and he'd been locked in there by snow and ice since the first snows, I guess, in the winter. So, but it was getting enough time it actually happened that as they walked out there, Ted opened his door and saw them, and he was with It was such that he was in the same garb that he was wearing when we arrested him. He was looking really old, tattered clothes and beard and everything. And Max just gets a look at him, and he's with this guy that Ted would know him by sight. And they just said, "Oh, hi, Ted. We're just taking a look around." And Ted just went back in his cabin, thought nothing of it. But Max looked at this guy and he said, "Oh my God, is this what we've been looking for all this time?" And he came back and he was absolutely convinced. So Terry and I, this guy, this hermit, snowbound hermit cannot be the Unabomber. He was adamant about that. And he was like the most experienced criminal agent you would have. And so we ended up going through this thing. Well, we have to, we have a lot of work ahead of us. And Max also had another great quote. He said, a snowbound hermit is going to be one heck of a hard sell as the Unabomber. And that proved true day in and day out. And so we knew our work was really cut out. And so we brought more agents in, rented cars, plane cars, and we were going around and we put Lincoln, Montana off limits. Nobody could go in there, too small of a town. They'll know the FBI's there. So they were working in the towns that surrounded, which was Helena kind of on one side, Missoula, Montana on the other. And they were about 80 or 90 miles away from Lincoln. And they started going to motels, checking registers, and we had another whole project going on to where did we know that the Unabomber was on any given day? So he had started not only mailing package bombs where he had to go into a post office and mail it. So we know that he was in Sacramento on that date when the bomb was mailed to Tiburon, California, and to Yale University. So if we have a suspect, he can't be somewhere else except in Sacramento on that day because that's where we know the Unabomber was. And we were building up this entire thing, and we had all of the letters that David Kaczynski had saved, every letter Ted had ever written to him, including the envelopes that had the postmark date. So we know we started to build a library of known facts about the whereabouts of the Unabomber. And so that was giving us a lot of things to look for. They could go in and say, well, if Ted was the Unabomber and he went to Sacramento, he had to go through Missoula. And the only way he had no vehicles, he only had a bicycle. The only way he could get there is on the Greyhound bus out of Lincoln, because no Uber, no taxis, it was a really small mountain town, and so we had to go to Missoula. So we started checking motels and all in there, and along the bus route back to Sacramento. They started getting hits because this time we had photographs of Ted Kaczynski, our suspect, and even a bus driver recognized him on a given day. When we go into motel records and he used his true name. And so we're gathering all this data. And in those weeks that we had to operate secretly, we built up one heck of a library of evidence that we have a suspect, and he's in every place that the Unabomber is known to have been. No conflict in any of those dates, and that was a big element in our search warrant.
Right.
And then as we became more acquainted with David Kaczynski and his family, David's mother, we finally interviewed her only like 2 or 3 days before we made the arrest. And Kathy Puckett, our FBI agent, who was also a PhD in psychology, that she became really good friends with Ted and David's mother, and she pulled out a trunk of documents and found even more documents to go through. There were known documents written by Ted Kaczynski, and we could have then experts compare words and things with the actual manifesto and coming up with all of that.
Did the mother at this time, Jim, did the mother at this point, 3 days before her son was arrested, did she know he was the suspect as the Unabomber?
Yes, and David had shared that with her, and the family were becoming very concerned because we start asking, well, how does Ted come up with the money to even buy a bus ticket to go anywhere, because he has no means of support. And they're saying, well, Teddy would sometimes call and say, or write a letter and say, I need, he would never call. He would write a letter and say, I need money to do this or do that, medical things or whatever. And they would send him $400 or $500 at a time. And so then we looked at the dates of that, and it was starting to coincide with the time frame of bombings where he needed to be in Salt Lake City, or he needed to be in Sacramento or in San Francisco on those dates, and we would look and see, well, he asked for money just, like a month before. So he had money. We found in a bank account that he had in Missoula. So we're starting to build a whole real solid case around him, but nothing. He didn't have anything. But like a prosecutor says, I saw him put this bomb down. We did have one eyewitness, by the way, that dates back to 1987. We show her the pictures, and she couldn't make it. So it's like the old adage, your eyewitness is your worst piece.
Really?
What did the family tell you? What triggered him to become radicalized? How he went from, functioning in society, working as a university professor, now he's completely off the grid, as like you said, as a hermit in this mountainous Montana cabin. What transpired there? Do you recall?
Well, the realization came through the manifesto again, because as David Kaczynski read through that manifesto, he kept pulling out ideas and all that. This certainly sounds like Ted. And I remember when he pulled out a letter and all here. This is from Ted. He's saying kind of the same thing about society and enough to where it really can. The more David looked at the comparison of words in letters he had written and what he had written in the manifesto, he became more and more convinced. And it was really bothering him that the family had given money that might have financed trips for Ted to go and murder somebody.
And that's awful. Yeah.
And by this time, he had assassinated, three people.
123 others. Yeah. But okay, so you got us hanging now on the edge. 3 days before he's arrested, the mom is pulling out all these letters and other writings, and you're just nailing all the evidence against him. And somehow in 3 days, the arrest occurs, and it's up in this mountain, and he hates people, and he doesn't want to talk to anybody. And you didn't have, I guess you had the warrants you needed at that point. So who goes in there and makes the arrest?
Well, just to back up just a bit, we talked about the leak, and the leak. We wish we'd had another
CBS.
Yeah, the CBS leak. Yeah,
to get all this information together, and those words had never been used in federal court. They never actually used a word comparison as official evidence that would link somebody to a crime. So this would be a first that the Department of Justice was also having to hang their hat on. And remember, there were visions of Ted in a snowbound cabin, no running water, no electricity. Our laboratory had said he melted scrap aluminum. He would need a portable kiln, electrical kiln, to actually do that to get the temperature. Well, you don't do that in Ted's cabin. Cabin. There was a pot-bellied stove as the only heat source he had in that cabin. I guess he melted it in the stove. I don't know, but he did it. But there was a lot of things that were contradictory. Like, how could he possibly do this? And it was actually the leak. Although it was forcing us into accelerated action, it actually served our purpose. The people on the ground, we want to get this done, and we have all these questions being asked, and it had to have ironclad evidence, before they would sign off on anything. And so it was the leak that pushed us into they gave us a 24-hour deadline before they would publish. And I said to Louis Freeh, I get him on the phone, and I was saying, we got to get people from San Francisco. I wanted a SWAT team here, not to hit the cabin, but just to encircle it, to make sure that he didn't, run out and escape over the mountains and this sort of thing, or to respond retroactively if he started shooting or trying to harm himself.
Yeah, I would imagine at that point you're kind of thinking, okay, well, if this guy's living remotely out in this cabin, he's kind of a survivalist. So, you're thinking maybe he's a Rambo type or something like that, as a survivalist that's got, rifles and knives and any number of things. So I guess that's how you approached it.
Well, we knew that from a neighbor that he had at least a rifle in there because he hunted he poached deer all the time, and he lived off the land.
Yeah.
So yeah, he definitely had guns, but that had to be his bomb making laboratory, his cabin. What are the chances that he has a bomb, or maybe booby trapped to blow up if somebody forces in the door or something?
Well, and I was going to ask you that too. I mean, what countermeasures or procedures did you guys go about when you were even approaching it? Because it could be very likely from his bomb making experience
Right.
that he did have some kind of booby traps.
Right, and all I have is a search warrant. I know
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So
And
we're talking about
were there any booby traps on the trails or the surrounding areas of
very
that
much a
cabin?
concern, and we didn't know at the time. And you talked before about local law enforcement can act on just probable cause and what they could see. Actually, FBI agents, any federal agent can actually do that as well, but the preponderance of legal advice is not to do so, unless you just absolutely have to. So I actually authorized Ted's arrest based on evidence. I did not have any prosecutor's authority to arrest Ted, and we did. But backing up a little bit, we brought in, overnight, um, Louis Freeh was able to talk to the head of CBS News and buy us like an extra 12 hours or something. So I could get people. I think we filled up every Delta flight from San Francisco flying into Salt Lake City, and then another flight into Helena, Montana, and we brought dozens of agents in just in the overnight landing, all night long. We were landing, and we were going to go the next morning. We had resourceful people there that had gone out and actually rented a 7-Up ranch, which was like a tourist thing with little bungalows and all, but it was closed for the season. But they were reopening for the Easter weekend because they had a restaurant there, and so I talked to them and we rented the whole place for several days. And it was like 5 miles out of Lincoln, Montana, and we had a covered story for why we were there. And like a corporate retreat or something. I forget what it was, but anyway, if anybody asks, this is what you tell them. And the people in that location were very cooperative and worked with us very well. And so we had a staging area, and everybody was coming into that staging area that next morning, like from before dawn, and we're just making plans on the fly. And I had about a week earlier, I had talked to Max Knoll, the supervisor there, and he's a guy that had criminal experience. I mean, he had been on a SWAT team that killed the airline hijacker and SFO, some Eastern European guy that did that like decades before. I mean, he'd been there and done it, in all kinds of cases. And I said, Max, we got a plan for eventually we're going to get an arrest warrant for this guy, and then we're going to go in there and we raised all, we thought everything you talked about, booby trapped cabin, booby trapped access areas to the cabin, thinking about all that. So we got to take him outside the cabin, obviously. And so our first plan was, well, when he finally goes into town, he goes in for provisions every spring after he comes out. So he's starting to come out of his cabin now. So we can just wait for him and we'll just take him. Well, we couldn't do all that because of the leak, and we had this deadline. So we have to do it within the next 12 hours.
Yeah.
It put a crimp on that. So we came up with, there was a Forest Service police officer in regular police uniform that knew Ted, had worked there with him for years. So we put him in the team of three people: Max Knoll, the supervisor, an FBI agent from Helena, Montana, and this police officer.
It took 40 days to get here. This is the moment we opened on.
They found out that from that property owner next door that there had been a company that was looking at mining leases from the previous fall, and that they had signed up actually gold and silver mining leases in that area. So the ruse was going to be that this police officer knows Ted. The three of them will walk down to the cabin, making all kinds of noise, talking loudly, so that Ted would hear them coming and not be frightened, and would recognize this police officer, and then And what happened is that's where we went out. We had deployed the SWAT team all around the cabin, but like 50 yards away, behind trees and stuff, just in case they needed backup as they're going up there. And I'm with the SWAT guy at another cabin about 100 yards, 200 yards away, and with a radio link to those guys, and also to, but not to Max and him. That team, they were incommunicado once they started walking in there, and so Max says they keep walking up there and they're talking loud, and nothing's happening in the cabin. And they get all the way up to the cabin. They finally hear some rustling around inside, and Ted opens the door just a crack, and he looks out, and the police officer says, "Hi, Ted. I'm sorry to get here so early in the morning, but I got these gentlemen from a mining company that are going to survey the property, and we need to find your property markers on your posts at the corners of your property." And Ted says, "Well, they're out there. They can just go look." And police officer said, "Well, no, they're covered with snow. We need you to come out and help." By this time, Ted had opened his door, and he had stepped out on the front little porch there. And he said, "Well, let me get my coat." And so he turns around to go back in, and they grab him. Oh. And they rustle him like this, just this one agent from Helm, he's a big guy, and he gives him like a big bear hug. Well, they start wobbling around, and it's icy, and looks like they're going to almost fall off the porch. And Max comes around, he puts his weapon right in Ted's face, and I just says, "I'm Special Agent Max Noll of the FBI, and I'm here to search your cabin."
Hello.
And he puts
friendly bear hug, yeah.
And he puts handcuffs on him and move him off we had prearranged. There was an elk hunter's cabin with no electrics or anything that was within walking distance. So that was the whole thing. That was set up to be where we would take him, and they did. And it just that was the moment of detention. He was not officially under arrest.
That's the moment they finally had him. But catching Ted Kaczynski was only half the story. In part 2, we go inside the cabin, uncover the evidence that sealed the case, including a live bomb he was sleeping on top of, and hear what finally drove him to kill. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.